All right, everybody, it's 1 o'clock. Time for some Latin studies here. Let everybody settle in. Before we get started, let me just let you know that I'm dealing with a cold. So if I seem a little grumpy today, or if my voice sounds funny, I've just got a cold. So don't take anything personally today, okay? Give me a wave just to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Good. So sounds good. All right. We'll give a few minutes for everyone to settle in here, and then we'll get started. I hope you're all having a good week of studies. Things are going well for us. Lots of lessons getting published. So good times, lots of fun. Just another minute here and we'll get going. Okay, so today is Friday, February 10th, and what I'm going to do is share my screen. So let me get this going here. Share my screen. All right. So up on the screen, this should look familiar to you if you've been here the past few weeks. And you may fuss and say, "Oh man, we're going to do the same thing we did last time." And the answer is yes. And there's a reason for that. Understanding the parts of speech is the most important thing in language studies. And there's an old saying, an old wise saying, that the beginning is half of the whole. The beginning is half of the whole. And in most studies, in most activities you participate in, anything you're interested in, there are basic skills that really, if you don't master those basic skills, you can never be good at that activity. For example, in sports, I don't know if any of you play sports, but if you think about a sport like baseball, you have to throw, you have to catch, and you have to be able to hit a ball. There's three basic skills. If you can't throw or catch, if you can't hit a ball, it doesn't matter how much you watch baseball or run around on a baseball field, you're not going to be any good because it all comes down to those three basic skills. And in basketball, you have to be able to dribble, you have to be able to shoot, and you have to be able to pass. Three basic skills. If you don't master those three basic skills, it doesn't matter how fancy you dress yourself up for your basketball game, you're going to stink if you don't master those basic skills. And so we have this old saying, like I said, the beginning is half of the whole. And so the same is true in our studies. In all of these different studies, there are a few skills that really are the essential skills, and students either master them and then go on to have success in those studies, or students never take the time to master them, and they always struggle. Just like it would be impossible to play a baseball game if you never figured out how to catch or how to hit. The same thing is true in studying languages. So when we get into classical Latin or Greek or any language studies, the ability to identify the parts of speech really is the basic skill. And if you're not good at this, you're just going to stink in language studies. It's just that simple. Okay, so I want to take some time to really focus on this and beat it into your brains, because I know as students that you wouldn't find this stuff interesting, and you'd probably be trying to rush past it into other stuff. And my job as a teacher is to help make sure you get the important stuff mastered and not just allow you to run forward. So what I'd like to do today, last week, I think we had a pretty good class last week because your responses were very good, and it seemed like you were understanding what we've been talking about. This week, I want to go over it again because I just want to give you an opportunity to really master it. And I promise you that next week we won't talk about identifying parts of speech. So this is going to be the last time we talk about this. But it's important, and I want to make sure we give it some time so that you can really master it. So what I've got on my screen here is I've got the text from John 1, which you should all be familiar with. And I've got that document that has the definitions of the parts of speech. And We're just going to go through verses 1 through 5 of the Gospel of John here, and we're going to practice identifying the parts of speech, and I'm going to help you to get more and more comfortable using this method of using the process of elimination to figure out the parts of speech for different words. Now, next week, God willing, if we have a meeting next week, what we're going to do is start learning about the characteristics of each of the different parts of speech. And so if you can identify a noun, then you can start to think about the characteristics of nouns, and you can start to understand words that you see in the language. That's why this ability to identify the parts of speech is so important. If you can't identify what part of speech a word is, all of your grammar knowledge is useless, because you have to ultimately know the part of speech. So we'll work on this week, and then next week we'll start to learn the characteristics of the parts of speech. And I think because we've taken some time to really master this, you'll start to understand some of the grammar lessons that maybe you have studied, but you really didn't understand when you studied them. I think they'll start to make more sense. Just continue to let some people in here. All right, so let's take a look at this. We've got the 8 parts of speech. Last week, we started this and worked on it a little bit. I'm going to ask you to respond to questions that I ask in the chat. So stick to my topics in the chat box. Don't turn that into a sort of a private chaos room. Just keep it focused on our class here today. What I'm going to do is ask you some questions, and just as a way of testing yourself, answer the questions and see if you can get all these things right. Hopefully, you'll be more comfortable this week, and we'll start to master this stuff. So let's just start out by picking up with verse 3 here. Let's look at verse 3. The first word in the sentence is omnia. And I can just tell you, because you would know this in the lesson, the word omnia means all things. And don't guess the part of speech. Just follow me through with this. What we have to learn is a method, and we learn methods because anybody can identify easy ones, right? There are easy ones, easy words to identify. But we want to learn the real method for this, so we can identify the difficult words. All right. So let's look at omnia here. Omnia is translated as all things, or all. Okay, that's what it means, all. So the first question I have is, do you think that the word omnia is a word that has a number of different forms, or just one form? What do you think? Chat your answer. Many forms or one form? Okay, good. Right. So omnia is a word that has many forms. We'll see it again and again in different forms. So it has many forms, and that means it's got to be one of the first 4 parts of speech. It means all, so keep that in mind. Does it express any idea of time? Yes or no? No. So we know that it's not a verb or a participle. So we're left with noun and pronoun, okay? We're left with noun and pronoun. A noun is a part of speech which has case and does not signify time. That certainly describes omnia, right? And then a pronoun is a part of speech which, in the place of a noun, signifies a certain person or thing. Of these two, noun and pronoun, which do you think omnia is, noun or pronoun? Very good. And so nouns, there's 2 different kinds of nouns. There's substantive nouns, and what's the other kind of noun? Substantives and what? Good. ADJ is good. Adjective. Good. Very good. So omnia is a noun, and it's an adjective noun. And like I said, in English grammar, adjectives are treated like a separate part of speech. So realize that in Latin, adjectives and substantives are just both included under nouns. All right, so omnia is good. That was pretty easy. Let's go on. The next word in the sentence is per. Per. It means by or through. That's what it means. That's told you in the lesson. Now, the question is this. Do you think the word per has many different forms or just one? What do you think? Many different forms or just one? All right, you're all wrong. You guessed wrong. So it has only one form. All right, the word pair has only one form. And how do we know that? Do you remember how I told you to figure out if a word has many forms or just one? What was the tip that I gave you last week? Does anybody remember? How can we figure out if, let's say you don't know Latin, you say, hey, Mr. Michael, how can you ask me these questions if I'm just getting started, right? I told you a tip on how to figure out if a word has one form or many. Very good. The Finetz has got it. Look it up in a dictionary. Okay. If you look a Latin word up in a dictionary, and you may say, well, I don't have a dictionary. Okay. Well, that's another problem. Let me give you some advice on a dictionary. Usually Latin dictionaries, you can find Latin dictionaries in any bookstore, cheap ones. They may not be very good, but they're good enough for what you need in like a Latin reading 1 class. So you can get a cheap Latin dictionary and it's probably good enough. But there's also online dictionaries that you can find. And if you want to learn about some online dictionaries you can use, just get in touch with me or I'll post some links on the student forum. But there's a number of different ones. But anyway, if you look a Latin word up in a dictionary, if a word has many different forms, you likely won't find the word you're looking for in the dictionary because only one of the forms is shown in the dictionary. Only usually the nominative case or the first verb form is shown for verb. So if you look a word up in the dictionary and you don't see it in the dictionary, that means it has different forms. So that's an easy way to answer that question. So when we look at the word per, if we looked it up in a dictionary, we'd find it. It would be in the dictionary because there's only one form. And that means that it's got to be one of these last 4 parts of speech. And so we start to use the process of elimination, okay? The easiest one to eliminate is usually an interjection because an interjection expresses an emotion, right? Like, wow, hey, oh, and so on. So usually we can eliminate interjection. Those are very easy to identify and we can usually knock those off the list pretty quickly. So we know that per is not an interjection. We know that it means by or through, not an interjection. Conjunctions are parts of speech that connect or order the parts of a sentence. The word per means by or through. Does that sound like a conjunction? Yes or no? No. No, don't guess the part of speech. If you listen, let me just say this. If you sit through these classes with me and in the end all you do is guess, you just miss the whole point of the lesson. All right? You don't need to guess when you can use reason and these definitions with the process of elimination. That's the whole point. You don't need to guess. And guessing is just lazy because there's no need to guess. There's no need to guess. And if you do guess, if you do need to guess, you should only be guessing between 1 or 2 options or 2 or 3 options that are left over. Okay? So don't guess. The word per does not connect anything in the sentence. So it's not a conjunction. It's not an interjection. We're left with 2 options, a preposition and an adverb. The definition for a preposition is a preposition is a part of speech which is generally set before other parts of speech. Okay, so the key to identifying a preposition, like Grace mentioned its meaning. It's not its meaning, Grace, because sometimes you're not going to know the meaning of a word. And so it's going to be more difficult. Okay, so that's why I want you to follow me on this method here. Or sometimes the meaning will depend on what part of speech it is. So you've got to figure out what part of speech it is before you can figure out what the meaning is. So it's more complicated than that. Okay. But a preposition is a part of speech which is generally set before other parts of speech. Now think about this word per. If we look at it, it's set before the word ipsum, and we do know the meaning of the word per in this place. It means by or through, because it doesn't have a lot of different meanings, the word. And so we know that it has to be by something or through something. So do you think it could be a preposition? Yes or no? Yes or no? Could it be a preposition? Yes, good. Okay. We've got this last option here, which is adverb. An adverb is a part of speech which, added to verbs, explains and defines the signification of them. Is the word per added to verbs or other parts of speech to explain their meaning? Yes or no? Yes or no? No, 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 no. Okay, no. So we're left with one option, which is preposition. And again, we've used this process of elimination. Now, when you get experience with this, you're not going to need to use the process of elimination. I mean, for example, when I write up these lessons and have to identify all the parts of speech, I don't go through this process of elimination for every single word, obviously. I know the parts of speech, but once in a while, there's a word that will stump me, and I will go through this process of elimination pretty quickly because I'll know that it's only 2 or 3 possibilities, but that's why I want you to learn this. Do I look it up? Sometimes, but looking things up is very slow. If you're going to learn a language, there's no time to look things up. It takes too long. So you want to learn how to figure things out without having to look them up. That's the goal. All right. So we've got omnia and pair. We've got an adjective, noun, and a preposition so far. Well, Grace, you can't just memorize Latin because there's lots of different options. You know, some of these words you'll see, they've got many different definitions. You know, if I open up a Latin dictionary, last night, for example, I was working on a Latin reading lesson, and there was a verb, and I didn't think that the verb made much sense in the translation, so I looked it up. And the verb was habeo, and here's the dictionary. This whole entire page explains the possible meanings of the verb habeo. So there's dozens and dozens of possible meanings, and it goes all the way to the next page. The next page just continues with the verb habeo. So there are many Latin words that have lots of different possible meanings, and so there's no way to memorize all of these things. Sometimes we have to look it up, or we have to just wait until we have experience to understand how to translate. So it's not that simple. We can oversimplify it for the sake of memorization, but then we would just be tricking you into thinking that you know something that you don't actually know. So some things we can memorize, some things we can't memorize. All right. So let's keep going here. The third word in this sentence is ipsum. Ipsum. And if we look at the lesson here, the lesson tells us that ipsum means what? What does ipsum mean? Ipsum means him. Good. Okay, so we know what it means. And if you've studied classical grammar, what part of speech is ipsum? Just to see who knows right off the top of their head what part of speech it is. It's a pronoun. Very good. So sometimes they're easy, right? Sometimes they're easy. Okay. Sometimes they're easy. So we have a pronoun. It's a part of speech which stands in the place of a noun. So here's another question for you. We have this word ipsum, which means him, and we said it's a pronoun. It stands in place of a noun. What I'd like to know is what noun is ipsum standing in place of? What noun is it standing in place of? So we've read verses 1 and 2. What word is ipsum standing in place of? So we've got some different answers. We've got verbum, we've got God. Let's take a minute and figure out what word ipsum is standing in place of. So we have the first verse says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word, and the Word was God. Hoc, this was in the beginning with God. All things per ipsum, all things through him. And then we'll get to the rest of the translation later. So who do you think the him is? We have 2 persons named here. We have the verbum, and we've got Deus. What's the subject of this passage? What are we talking about here? What's the subject? I think I'm going to agree with Zuhe, who said verbum. Yeah, no, it's not it's not the beginning. That's a prepositional phrase. That's not the subject. The subject of that first verse is verbum. In the beginning was the verbum. Okay? We're talking about the verbum, and even in verse 2, listen to me now, we're going to get into this. In verse 2, hoc is a pronoun. It refers back to the verbum, so the verbum again is assumed to be the subject. And then in verse 3, we have another pronoun, ipsum, which refers to him. And we can see that the subject of this whole passage is the verbum. That's what we're talking about. So whenever you identify a pronoun, you should make sure that you understand what noun the pronoun is actually standing in place of, okay? So ipsum, I think, is an easy one. We quickly identified it as a pronoun, but even still, I want you to think about what noun it stands in place of. Okay, let's go. Now we get into some more difficult ones here. Next, we have this word facta. Facta. Now, don't guess. Don't look at the lesson. Don't cheat, because you may have an answer now, but I'm concerned about you in the future, being able to work through these lessons quickly. We have this word facta, and we're told in the lesson that it means made, facta, like a factory is a place where things are made, facta, okay? Good. Now let me ask you this. Facta, we have this word facta. Does it have one form or many forms? One or many? Many. Good. It has many forms. Okay. So we know that it has to be one of the first 4 parts of speech. Okay. One of the first 4 parts of speech. Does it express an idea of time? Yes or no? Facta means made. Does it express an idea of time? Yes or no? Yes, it does. Very good. So it cannot be a noun or a pronoun. That leaves us with verb and participle. All right, so we have facta. A verb is a part of speech which has moods and tenses, but is not declined into cases. Does it look like the word facta? We see another form of it right here in factum. Does it look like the word facta is declined into cases? Yes or no? So we've got some disagreement there. Facta is declined into cases. We can see 2 different cases right here in this sentence. Okay, so it is declined into cases, and therefore it cannot be a verb because it's declined into cases. So the only one left is participle. A participle is a part of speech which has cases and tenses. So the word made, facta, has tense, it's past tense, and it also has cases. So it can only be a participle. Now, Grace, you were saying this is super duper easy, but like I said, what I want you to understand is that, yeah, for most words, hopefully this will be super duper easy. But the reason why I'm spending all this time on it is because sometimes they're just more confusing. And if you learn the method for figuring these things out, you can deal with the difficult ones. That's the real challenge, okay? So that was a hard one. Facta is a participle, and participles are a little more rare, so they're a little more difficult to understand. If any of you have taken the classical grammar course, I know that many of you have. If you're in classical grammar, you know that we get to lessons on participles, and those lessons are confusing, right? Once we get into participles, things get difficult. Most of you submitted assignments for the lesson on participles and got them sent back to you because you couldn't think of good examples of participles, because it's a little more complicated than you think. Participles are usually a source of confusion for students because they're sort of a combination of different parts of speech. So facta is an example of a participle, a past participle. It means made. Next, we have the word sunt, which I think most of you can guess. It means they are. What part of speech is sunt? I think you can guess. It's a verb. Good. Extra credit question. What kind of verb is it? What kind of verb is sunt? If you took elementary or classical grammar, what kind of verb is sunt? Very slick there, Xavier. I think I know what you're abbreviating. What kind of verb is it? Does anybody know? Anybody can tell me? Good. Yeah, if you're going to abbreviate something, use at least 3 letters. So good. It's a copulative verb. Very good. Okay, so that's a pretty simple one. But let's just make sure we understand why it's a verb. The word sunt, it means they are. Does it express an idea of time? Yes or no? Yes, it does. Okay. Yes, it does. It expresses an idea of time. It's present. They are present. It expresses time. Does it have different cases? Now, you may say, well, yeah, it's got different forms, right? Est is the same verb. So it looks like it has different form, but they're not cases. That's the difference. Okay. It doesn't have cases. It has different forms, different persons and numbers, but not different cases. And we'll, in next week, we'll see why verbs don't have cases, but it's got to be a verb. Okay, so that's sunt. Next, we have the word et. The word et. Let me ask you this. Yeah, I know you know the meaning. That's okay. Let me ask you this. This word et, does it have different forms, many forms, or just one form? Et. One form. Good. All right, if you look up et in the dictionary, it'll be there. It has one form. So it can't be any of the first 4 parts of speech. It's got to be one of the last 4. What's the first part of speech that we cross off this list? Out of the last 4, what's the first one we usually knock off? Good, interjection. It's not an expression of emotion. That's the easiest one to eliminate. So we're left with preposition, adverb, and conjunction, okay? And I'll let you guess on this one because I think most of you know it. What is it? Yeah, you're already guessing. Good, it's a conjunction. Okay, good, it's a conjunction. All right, so et is a conjunction. Next, we have sine. Sine. First question is, does it have many forms or just one? Sine. Many forms or one? Just one form. Okay, if you look it up in a dictionary, you'll find it. Sine has one form, so it's got to be one of these last 4. What's the first one we knock off the list? Interjection, right? Doesn't express emotion, not an interjection. When we look at this, we see that it expresses the idea of without. That's the idea in the lesson, without. So it's got to be followed by an object. It has to take an object without something or without someone. So it's got to be followed by something, and that should give us a clue of what part of speech it is. If it's got to be followed by something, what part of speech is it? If it's got to be set before something, then it's a preposition. That's what it means. Again, Grace, don't rely on the meanings because the meanings vary with words. You can have a word that's got 10 different meanings. Sometimes it's a preposition, sometimes it's a conjunction, sometimes it's an adverb. So it's a little more complicated than that. Okay. So this word sine is a preposition. The object of the preposition, that's what we call the word that follows it. We call it the object of the preposition. The object is ipso, and that should look familiar because we just saw another form of it over here, ipsum. So ipsum and ipso are the same word. So we know it has different forms. So we know it's got to be one of these first 4 parts of speech, and we've already identified ipsum. So what is ipso? Pronoun, good. It's a pronoun, so that's easy enough. So we have sine, a preposition followed by a pronoun. Good, all right, without him. Next, we have the word factum, which should be familiar to us because we already saw another form of it, facta. What part of speech was facta? Nope, it wasn't a verb, it was a participle, okay? And just so you know, factum does not mean made is. Factum just means made. Okay, is comes from the next word. Factum means made. It's a participle. All right, so we've got that. Then we've got est. Est is another form of the same verb that we have sunt. Est is the same verb, a different form. What part of speech is est? Verb, very good. Copulative verb, good. Okay, now here's a challenging one. Next up, we have the word nihil. First, what does the word nihil mean in the lesson? What does nihil mean? It means nothing, okay? Here's the challenge with nihil. Ready? This is why this is a weird word. Nihil means nothing. Does nihil, the word nihil, does it have other forms? Does it many forms or just one? It's got just one form. No, it doesn't have many forms. If you look up nihil in the dictionary, it's got just one form. Now, if you follow the normal rules, you would say, oh, well, nihil has just one form, so it must be one of these last four parts of speech, but you'd be wrong. Okay, nihil is just an irregular word. Okay, so nihil only has one form, but it's not one of the last four, it's one of the first four. It means nothing. It means nothing. Does it express any idea of time? Yes or no? Any idea of time in nothing? No, no idea of time. So it's got to be a noun or a pronoun, right? It's got to be a noun or a pronoun. Does it stand in place of any other nouns? Does it stand in place of a noun? No, it doesn't. So it's got to be a noun. So even though the word nihil has only one form, it's actually a noun. It's an undeclined noun. It's a noun that has no other forms. It has only one form. So it's a weird one, but it's a noun. It's okay, nihil. No, it's not an adjective noun. It's a substantive noun. Okay. It's a substantive noun. All right. So that's that. Grace, the process of elimination would still work because if you tried to identify the other four, preposition, adverb, interjection, conjunction, it wouldn't be any of those. It wouldn't match any of those definitions. So you'd be left wondering what to do because you would say, well, this only has one form. It must be one of the last four. But then if you went through the definitions, you'd say, wait a minute, it's none of those. And so you'd be forced to try to figure out what's going on. And if you looked it up in a dictionary, you would see that it says it's an undeclined noun. It's just a weird noun. There's a few of those in Latin. Okay, so nihil is a noun, a substantive noun. Next, we have the word quod. Next, we have the word quod, and keep the translation in mind. Let's just go over this. All things through him made are, or are made, and without him made is nothing. And then we have the word quod. What does the word quod mean? What does the word quod mean? That, yeah, that or which. Very good. Okay. Does it have many different forms, this word quod? Are there different forms of this word or just one? Yes, there are different forms, and we'll see them all over the place. These little Q words are very difficult to learn. It takes a lot of time to get familiar with all the different forms of the Q words, right? They're always a trouble for students getting started with Latin. So it's got different forms, so we know it's probably going to be one of the first four of the parts of speech. Does it express any idea of time? Yes or no? Any idea of time in that or which? Yes, it expresses time. What time is expressed in that? What time? Yeah, that's not right. Okay, it doesn't express time. No time. So it can't be a verb or a participle. It's got to be a noun or a pronoun. All right, so we've got these two options. And when we're left with these two options, noun and pronoun, what we want to do is try to eliminate pronoun. Okay, so let's look at pronoun. A pronoun is a part of speech which stands in the place of a noun and signifies a certain person or thing. Does the word quod stand in place of a noun? Yes or no? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It stands in the place of a noun. It means that or which. I'm just thinking there's an easy way to know that. If I just say the word that, you have no idea what I'm talking about, right? If I say, hey, Abigail, give me that. You say, what are you talking about, crazy man? I don't know what the subject is. Okay, so if we just use a pronoun before we've established a subject, it will make no sense. And many people do that. That's why in your assignments, I tell you to write with complete sentences, because often, we'll start answering a question and we'll start using pronouns and we haven't established who the person is that we're thinking of. And, we have to be careful not to use pronouns when the subject isn't clearly understood. Okay, so the word that can be used in place of a noun, therefore it is a pronoun. All right, so that's it for quote. Next, we've got factum again. We've already seen that twice. What part of speech was factum? It's a participle. Very good. The word est, we've already seen that before. What part of speech is est? Est is a verb. Very good. Next, we have in. We've already seen in before. We saw it back up here at the beginning of this passage. In. What part of speech was in? A preposition. Very good, because it has to be set before another word to make sense. If I just say the word in, it makes no sense. Okay, if I look at you and say in, I just look like a crazy person, because in what, right? We have to ask the question, in what? So we're looking for that object of the preposition. In is just a word that has to be set before something else. So in is a preposition. We then have ipso, which we've seen already in different forms. What part of speech is ipso? Pronoun. Very good. And then we come to a new one. Don't guess. Don't guess. So we have this word vita, vita. And if we look at the lesson, we're told that it means life. Okay, it means life. Does it express any idea of time? Any idea of time in the word life? No, it does not. There's always disagreement. I just take your time and think. The word life, does it express time? If I said, what time is this? If you said life, that wouldn't make any sense. So it doesn't express any time, okay? Again, you'd sound like a crazy person. Life doesn't express time. So we know it's not a verb or participle. Does it have different forms? Are there different forms of this word, vita? What do you think? You might not know, right? You can guess yes, but you might not know. How can you check if there are different forms? How can you check it? Yeah, dictionary. Good. So you look up the word vita in the dictionary, and you find that it's in the dictionary. So does that mean it only has one form? Yes or no? If we find the word in a dictionary, does that mean it has only one form? No, it's not what it means. Because if you look at the definition of the word in the dictionary, you'll see that it talks about other forms. If we look up a word in a dictionary that has other forms, and we find that word in the dictionary, what kind of word is that? That may be a difficult question. Let me ask it again. Let's take a word like vita, and I can just tell you, just to kind of give you the answer. It has different forms, okay? But if we look up the word vita in the dictionary, we know that it has different forms, and we find it in the dictionary. What form of the word is vita? You've got to know some grammar to know this, but what form of the word would be found in the dictionary? Very good. Zuhay's got it. Nominative form. Good, Abigail. Right. Okay, so if we look up a word that has different forms or different cases, and we find the word in the dictionary, that's the nominative form. So that's what we've got here. We've got the nominative form of a noun, vita, a part of speech which has case and does not signify time. It's not a pronoun, so we can eliminate pronouns. So we know that vita is a noun, a substantive noun. Next up, we've got the word erat. What does it mean? What's the meaning of erat? Was. Good. Does it express an idea of time? Yes or no? Yes, it does. Was. That's obviously got time in it, right? Okay, past tense. So it's got time. Does it have different forms, this word? Are there different forms of this word? Yes or no? There's always someone who says the wrong answers. Yes or no? Does it have different forms, erat? It means it was. Different forms? Yes, it does have different forms. All right, so if it has different forms and it expresses time, it can only be a verb or a participle. Does it have cases? Yes or no? Is there a nominative case and a genitive case of the word erat? No, there's not. So it must be a verb. Okay, so it's a verb. Erat. It means was. Next, we have et. What part of speech is et? Everybody should know that. What part of speech? Conjunction. Very good. We've already seen vita. What part of speech is vita? What part of speech is vita? Very good. It's a noun. We just did erat. What part of speech was erat? We just did it. Verb. No, it wasn't a preposition. A verb. Very good. Next, we come to a new word, lux. Lux. Does this word lux have one form? Yes, it means light. Very good. Nobody asked that. Does the word lux have one form or many forms? One form or many? And you may say, I don't know, right? Okay, I'm new to this. I wasn't born knowing if the word lux has different forms, so how can I answer that question? So we look it up in a dictionary. Do we find the word lux in the dictionary? Yes or no? Yes, we do. Does that mean that it must be one of the last four parts of speech? If we find the word in the dictionary, does that mean it must be one of the last four parts of speech? No, doesn't mean that. It means that it's the nominative form. Okay, so it's the nominative form and it has different parts of different forms. We'll see that if we look it up in a dictionary. So we know that it doesn't express time and it has different forms. So it's got to be a noun or a pronoun. Does it stand in place of other nouns? Yes or no? No, it doesn't. Therefore, it must be what? What part of speech is lux? It's a noun. Very good. It's a noun. Next, we have hominum. Hominum. And we're going to wrap up here. So let's finish up well. No guesses. No lazy guesses. Hominum. First question. Is this a word that has different forms or just one form? What do you think? Yes, it means man. Nobody asked that. Many. Very good. Very good. Many. Okay, so it's got to be one of these first four parts of speech. Does it express time? It means of men. Does it express time? No, doesn't express time. So it's got to be noun or a pronoun. Is it used in place of other nouns? Yes or no? Nope. So it's got to be a noun. Good. Okay, it's a noun. That's right. Now it's translated of men. Of men. What case expresses the idea of? What case? Possessive, that's a good answer. Yeah, possessive. That in English we use possessive case, but in classical grammar we use genitive case. So that's right. Possessive case, genitive case. Good. Okay. So it's a noun, but it's in the genitive case. Good. And then if you go on, you'll see we see et again. What part of speech is et? Conjunction, very good. What part of speech is lux? We already did it. Lux. Noun, very good. What part of speech is in? We've already done it twice. Preposition. In is a preposition. In is not a noun, unless you're just a little slow. In is a preposition. Then we have tenebris, which means darkness. And so we go on. We've got some more words here to get into. I'm not going to get into them today, but on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the most, how comfortable do you feel identifying parts of speech? 1 is not comfortable at all. 10 is very comfortable. How do you feel about identifying parts of speech? Damien, you got some wrong and you're rating yourself as a 10. So I think you need to reevaluate. 10 means very comfortable. All right, so you should be, hopefully you're above 5. Hopefully nobody's down in the 0 or 1 range at this point. But we've gone through these a couple of times now. I'm not going to spend any more time doing this in the future. So next week, what we're going to do is start moving on to learn the characteristics of the parts of speech, which will be just as fun. If you enjoy these things, maybe not, but it'll be fun. We'll get into these things. And I think that when we go over them in our class today, I think when we go over them in class next week, lesson 3, which is very difficult in Latin grammar, will become pretty simple. So that's my goal. My goal is to help make the hard lessons easier. Okay. I'm not going to go over the easy lessons with you. My goal is to make the hard lessons easier. Okay. So that's all for this week. I'll post a copy of this video on the student forum. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, I'll hang out for a little bit and take some questions on the chat. But otherwise, we're going to sign off and wrap up for today. All right. Thanks for coming. God bless you all.